Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy and specifically to talk about the value of the Russian ruble. Now, if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I've posted a series of videos looking at the value of the ruble. I posted one when it dropped to 95 against the US dollar, one at 96, one at 97, one at 98, and one at 99, which was posted on the 14th of November, so just over 7 days ago. And in today's video, I want to talk to you about the fact that the value of the ruble has now smashed through that 100 level and is actually trading above 103 against the US dollar. So we're seeing an acceleration in the decline of the ruble here. And this is going to cause major concern in Russia because the last time that it broke through the 100 barrier, back in the summer of 2023, President Putin was furious and instructed the Russian central bank to do something about it immediately. They stepped into the international market, started buying rubles in what's left of the market because there's actually very few countries that are still actually dealing in rubles. And they got the value back up to around 90 to 1 US dollar. But over the last 12 to 15 months, we've seen the value starting to drift. And this fall in value is going to cause major problems for the Russian economy. This chart shows the movement in the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Russian ruble over the past 12 months. And what this shows is that this time last year, 1 US dollar was trading for around 89 Russian rubles. However, today it's trading above 103, which represents a fall in value over the last 12 months of around 15%, which in itself is significant for any major currency. However, if we zoom in and have a look at what's been happening over the past 3 months, you can see that at the start of August, 1 US dollar was trading for 84 Russian rubles, which means that the value of the ruble has fallen by more than 22% in the past 3 months. And you can see from the shape of the curve just how severe the deterioration in value has become. And one of the drivers for the acceleration in the fall in the value of the ruble over the past 3 months has been the increase in the financial sanctions. In the summer of 2024, the US instructed Chinese and Indian banks that they would face secondary sanctions if they were found to be allowing payments to go to any Russian individual or company that's on the sanctioned list. And what this has meant is that they've now applied a whole new level of compliance and checks. And so very little money is actually moving from China and India to Russia at the moment. And that's causing pressure to build up within the Russian economy. They're running short of cash. And so the Russian central bank can no longer afford to keep supporting the ruble. And that's one of the reasons why the value is drifting. One of the other reasons is because over the last 18 months, both China and India, which are Russia's two main trading partners, have refused to deal in rubles. China will only deal in Chinese yuan, so all of the transactions that China and Russia are doing, both the purchase of Russian oil and gas and other fossil fuels by China, are being made in Chinese yuan, and all of the imports that Russia are buying directly from China are also being paid for in yuan. So this is helping the yuan in terms of the strength of its currency, but it's at the detriment of the Russian ruble. And from India's point of view, they originally wanted to use their own currency, the Indian rupee. However, the Russians refused to use that, and so they're now using a combination of the Chinese yuan and the United Arab Emirates dirhams. So that's causing more demand for those currencies and pushing up the value, and we're seeing the ruble becoming less used in the international markets. And just in case you were thinking that the reason why the ruble is falling in value is because the dollar is particularly strong at the moment following Donald Trump's win in the presidential election, this chart shows the movement in the exchange rate between the Chinese yuan and the Russian ruble over the past 12 months. And as you can see, the profile here is almost identical to what we saw for the US dollar. This time 12 months ago, 1 Chinese yuan was trading for 12.5 Russian rubles. Today, it's trading for more than 14.25, which means that the value of the ruble has fallen by 14% over the past 12 months. And at the start of August 2024, 1 Chinese yuan was actually trading for 11.7 Russian rubles. It was one of the strongest rates in the past 12 months. And over the past 3 months, the ruble has fallen by 22% against the Chinese yuan. So exactly the same fall as we've seen for the American dollar. And this chart shows the exchange rate between the Indian rupee and the Russian ruble and has exactly the same profile as the previous two charts that we looked at for the Chinese yuan and the US dollar. This time 12 months ago, one Indian rupee was trading for just over 1.06 Russian rubles. Today, it's trading for more than 1.22, which represents a fall in value of 14%. And at the start of August, the two currencies were actually trading at parity. They're at 1-to-1, which means that over the past 3 months, the ruble has fallen in value against the rupee by more than 22%. As we've discussed in previous videos, the value of a currency is intrinsically linked to the strength of an economy. If your economy is doing well, then that means that generally speaking, there will be demand to trade with the companies in your country, and therefore there will be demand for your currency. And simple economics tells you that when there's demand for anything, if it's going up, then that will raise the price. And that's exactly what happens with currencies. And what we're seeing in Russia is that the fall in the value of the ruble is reflecting the fact that the economy is not doing well. Generally speaking, the companies within Russia are not performing that well at the moment. They've had a reduction in the amount of trade that they're doing internationally. The number of countries that they're dealing with has fallen dramatically since the sanctions were applied against Russia. And this has led to a huge reduction in the demand for the ruble because there's less trade, and that's one of the reasons why the price has fallen. We've also got direct financial sanctions against a lot of financial institutions around the globe. And the result of that is that those financial institutions are deliberately avoiding any transactions in Russian rubles. So that's also driven down the demand for rubles. All of this is really bad news for Russia because as the value of your currency falls, it means that everything that you're importing becomes relatively more expensive. Now, we've been through this example a number of times before, but if we have a product that's priced at $1, this time last year, that product would have been selling, roughly speaking, for 89 rubles because the exchange rate a year ago was $1 for 89 rubles. Today, that same product, which is still priced at $1 in the international markets, would be selling for 103 rubles. So basically, if your family budget is only in rubles, that's all you have to spend, and you need to buy that item, it's gone up in price from 89 rubles to 103. So that represents an increase of more than 10%. And that's one of the things that's driving up inflation in Russia at the moment. This chart shows the movement in the official inflation rate in Russia over the past 12 months. And one thing to note about the chart here is that the scale on the right-hand side does not start at 0. It actually starts at 7% and goes up to 10%. And as you can see, over the past 12 months, the lowest level that inflation got to was 7.4% in January. And between January and August 2024, inflation increased rapidly to 9.1%. And whilst it's come down slightly to 8.5% in October 2024, it is still sitting at more than double the target rate of 4% set by the Bank of Russia. And in order to try to bring inflation back down towards that target rate, the Bank of Russia has increased interest rates on 8 separate occasions over the past 18 months to the current level of 21%. And an interest rate of 21% is prohibitively high. No company or individual will want to borrow at those sort of levels because you'd have to pay the bank a margin on top of that. And it was recently reported that Russia's biggest mortgage lender, Sberbank, increased its mortgage rates to 28%. And at 28%, nobody wants to take out a mortgage. So what that's going to mean is we're going to see the property market starting to come down in Russia, and it will likely come down very rapidly. And I'm working on a video on that at the moment, so watch out for that one coming out. And if we quickly have a look at what the exchange rate between the dollar and the ruble has been doing over the past 25 years, you can see that the current rate is the worst in Russia's history. And the fact that the Russian ruble has now hit an all-time low tells us categorically that the Russian economy isn't doing well at the moment. It simply doesn't make sense for the economy to be booming and for the currency to be in the toilet. That is not a logical conclusion. And one of the problems that this also brings to the table is the fact that Russian citizens and companies are seeing their wealth being eroded. Because if you've got all of your savings in rubles, let's say you had 1 million rubles, which sounds like a lot, but actually that's only around $10,000. The international purchasing power of those rubles has fallen by 22% over the past 3 months. So basically, if you wanted to leave Russia, if you wanted to emigrate and take all of your money with you, every day that the ruble falls in value, it means that your wealth is going down. And obviously that's a major concern for both companies and individuals. And one of the problems that this usually causes is you get a high level of dollarization. That's what happened in countries like Turkey and Argentina. People lost faith in their own currency and started wanting to do deals in the American greenback. Now, that isn't happening in Russia because I don't think it'd go down very well with President Putin if everybody started using American dollars. But the reason why people do that is because they are concerned about the loss of wealth. And that's what's happening in Russia right now. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to make this video despite the fact that my voice is not in great shape today, because what's happening with the Russian ruble, I think, is really quite important. And we've seen it break through that critical 100 barrier. And previously, this barrier was seen as being sacrosanct. President Putin did not want the ruble ever to go below the 100 level, but it has, and it's actually smashed through it. And it's now gone through 103. And if you look at the shape of the chart over the past week or so, it is starting to accelerate. And I think there's a number of factors that are driving that. Firstly, we saw the increase in the sanctions earlier this year, where the US basically instructed Chinese and Indian institutions to make sure that they double, triple, quadruple checked every single transaction to make sure that nobody in the chain had been sanctioned, because if they had, then the Chinese and Indian financial institutions would find themselves hit with sanctions themselves. And that's the last thing that they want, because whilst they've become important trading partners for Russia, Russia actually represents a small percentage of the global exports for both India and China. So they need to protect their global trade at the expense of Russia if necessary. So that's one of the main drivers why we've seen the ruble falling in value. The other factor is because China and India aren't interested in dealing in rubles. So whilst the level of trade has gone up for Russia, there hasn't been a subsequent increase in the demand for the ruble because none of those deals are being done in rubles. But the other factor, I think, that's causing the ruble to fall, and this is probably the biggest factor in the last 3 months, is that the Russian central bank is running out of cash. It doesn't have enough money to keep supporting the value of the ruble, and so it's started to let it drift. And it will be really fascinating to see how low it goes, because now it's gone through that mental barrier of 100. There's no real line in the sand that you're needing to bring it back to. So we could see the value of the ruble continuing to drift on a daily basis. And as we've talked about in today's video, that does have some real world consequences for Russia, because it increases the cost of all of its imports. Anything it's buying from overseas will now cost more. And that's going to have an impact on inflation. So it will push up prices. And as inflation goes up, then the Bank of Russia will want to increase interest rates to bring it back down. Now, interest rates are already at 21%, prohibitively high. If they carry on going up, or even just remain at 21%, that's going to reduce the amount that companies and individuals are borrowing. That will then lead to a reduction in investment because companies won't be borrowing to expand. So that's going to be bad news for the economy. It's also going to mean that the property sector in Russia, which equates to around 10% of all of GDP, will also start to go into decline because there'll be no deals. Nobody will be borrowing to buy property. We may see property prices starting to fall. They could even crash, and that will have another major impact on the Russian economy. So all of this is really bad news for Russia, and it will become a vicious circle because as the economy contracts and the state gets less tax, that means that the Bank of Russia will have even less money to be able to support the ruble, so the ruble could deteriorate further, and that will then drive up inflation, which could mean higher interest rates, and so it goes on. So you can start to get a feel as to why the value of the ruble is so important, and as to why I've posted so many videos on this topic. And even this one on a day when I probably shouldn't really be making a video because my voice isn't really up to scratch, and apologies once again for it, but I really wanted to post it because I think the message is quite important. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, even in this voice, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.